Okay, thank you everyone, and welcome to this session. Our session is will focus on the role of civil society in fostering and in assuring government's ethics and accountability. Beyond the topic of corruption, the session will focus on the role civil society plays in fostering governmental accountability, highlight key success and challenges related to these efforts, and offer concrete recommendations on how civil society, citizens, and especially youth can hold their governments accountable to the principles of good governance in all realms. For this session, I will be the moderator. I am Father Alain Zadi, the director of Centre d'études pour l'action sociale, CEPAS, which is a research center for social action in DRC, Kinshasa. And we have a panel of 3 speakers. We've got Mr. Olusegun Onigbinde, co-founder and CEO of Bolt IT, Federal Republic of Nigeria. The second speaker will be Mrs. Cherry Lay Erasmus, of Global Director of Learning Accountability Lab in the United States. And the third speaker is Mr. Ibrahima Khalil Geye, a Yali alumnus and chair and co-founder, Organization for Positive Change, Republic of Guinea. And you can find the more details on the website. For this session, each of the speakers will offer a 6-minute remarks, and then we will open the floor for interactions with the assistants. So we start then with Mr. Olusegun. You've got your 6 minutes starting from now.
Thank you so much, Father Alain. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure. And I'm glad to be part of this on this session on accountability and ethics, how civil society can hold leaders accountable. I've always maintained that democracy is as a fundamental plank, and that is accountability. The only reason why we call it democracy is not because it delivers development only. It's not because it's the only purpose that vehicle that can bring out social economic rights or welfare for the people. It's just because citizens have a right to inquire, to question, and to hold public officers accountable. And I think that is a very key element in measuring the quality of democracies in countries. And people would say that power would not yield anything without demand until we constantly demand and question and hold leaders accountable. That's when we get results. But one of the few things, I'll put 3 things that are extremely critical when it comes to the issue of holding power to account. First thing in my mind is we have to do it that with data. In my own view of doing the work around accountability in Nigeria, I say the emphasis on data and putting that in the front burner is extremely important in holding officers accountable. When people have access, when people look at the data that are provided, I mean, I've worked on fiscal governance for the last 9 years, and I've seen that when people are confronted with the data and they're told about this is how you spend public money, this is from the official data that you're presented, they tend to look into it and say, okay, we have answers, we have questions, and we need to provide answers. So it's always going to be very effective that civil society is able to put data in front, because civil society has a critical role in ensuring that public officers, holders, accountable to the powers that they wield or the authorities they wield in communities, and also about the resources or the commonwealth of the societies that they preside over. So it's very important that they put data in there. The second thing that I think is also important in the role of civil society in holding leaders accountable is being able to have a common agenda and being able to apply that within co-creation framework. Institutions such as the Open Government Partnership is mainstreaming opportunities for government and civil societies to sit down side by side to hold government officials accountable. And it's not just about shouting from the outside, it's not about just the race for the loudest or how many press releases that we can put out there. We also must understand that at the end of the day, we have to come to the table and being able to have meaningful conversations to be able to hold leaders accountable. And that role comes from us being able to take advantage of opportunities like the Open Government Partnership. And that co-creation network means that we're able to be firm, assertive, and clear about our demands in optimizing the experiences of the citizens and also public resources in general. So for me, the role of civil society also means that we know that it's not just one organization that can really lead to engender transformation or push for growth or for even optimization of public resources. There has to be organizations need to be able to bundle together and to be able to come together and speak with one voice and be able to hold public officers accountable. And I think that role is extremely important in how we be able to build engagement within in holding leaders accountable. And the third thing also that has to do with accountability for me is that we also have to be also the role is about building inclusivity in how we have conversations. It's not just going to be about when we say civil society, we must broaden that term to include others. I mean, to look at underserved groups, groups in local communities, groups that represent also a specific constituency, such as the media, the people living with disabilities, people who are in local communities who also don't have access to social media, 3G, 4G networks. People like that also have to be mainstream into the conversation. Trade associations, faith-based organizations. So when we talk about the role of civil society, we can't just look at it within just a blanket of non-profit organizations that possibly receiving funding locally or from outside the country. It has to be broadened. I mean, because so that the legitimacy can be much more stronger to talk to people who also include trade organizations, trade unions, and groups that are necessary to be able to build those kind of conversations. And I think by the time we recognize the role of data in being able to build conversations, we also understand that it's very important that we are building a co-creation mechanism to deliver this effectively, and we are also trying as much as possible to be much more inclusive in our demand. We understand that the civil society will be much more stronger and will now be a potent force in being able to hold leaders accountable in a much more specific way. Something that my understanding in the last 9 years of leading the budget has been that change is not quick, and sometimes change might not even be linear. And so what we might expect to achieve in 10 years, we might achieve it within 1 year. And something that you expect would take 1 year might actually take maybe much more 10 years. But I think as civil society organizations that want to do much more work is we have to pay attention also to the political economy of the issues that we are trying to address. And paying attention to that political economy means that we are a bit more effective to understand the surrounding context that might limit our abilities of demanding effective governance or even getting delivery. Understanding who actors and which people can be our allies, which are the people that can be against us and things like that. That's going to be effective also in trying to tackle corruption or hold leaders accountable. So I think it's a very significant role for the civil society. And I'm happy to take questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Elkam. And Mrs. Cherry, the floor is yours.
Lane, thanks for the opportunity to speak here today. I think the reason a platform like Yali exists is exactly because there's just no shortage of young people with great ideas on the African continent, and also young people in civil society who are hungry for reforms. And I think first and foremost at the Accountability Lab, we believe in the power of networks, in harnessing the strength of civil society. And not just ordinary actors working together, but more than that, we believe in building unlikely networks. As Olusegun said before me, we need to start reaching people who are usually excluded from conversations, people in rural areas, women, young people, people with disabilities, those from marginalized groups. But this is often quite hard to do through traditional methods or top-down approaches with regards to accountability and change. So some of the things we've done at the Accountability Lab is to train young people in gathering citizen-generated data on critical issues in their communities. And we specifically train young people from marginalized groups and outlying communities whose ideas for their country are very seldom included in policy-making processes, and who, because of that, can often get despondent, and that has a very negative effect on how they see their own agency, their influence, and even the value of participation. So being able to gather data from the ground up, convene people around these findings, around what's going wrong in their communities, and being able to feed these ideas and solutions up into policymaking processes, give people a sense of, I can be heard. Even though I'm in a really outlying community affected by the extractive sector, for example, my ideas can in some way be fed up into processes. We also believe that you have to make participation easier for people. Often projects that are rolled out at the national level, or things such as, for example, the COVID mitigation strategy in countries, become very hard for community members to monitor, to hold power holders to account, because documents and project scopes are often written in legalese and not really broken down so that communities understand what they are entitled to, what are their rights. So again, we build unlikely networks with, for example, musicians who can write messages around these accountability aspects that can go out on radio so that we reach people beyond the digital divide and get to communities. We create and print bulletins that break down really complex policy issues into an infographic format, again, so that people understand it and that you can start bridging the literacy divide that is very prevalent in the countries where we work. Because participation is key. And if people, first and foremost, don't understand how to participate and what question is actually even on the table, because things are written in a very difficult manner, then there's really no way for them to become engaged and take up their role as active citizens and active community members. And I believe there's a key role for civil society to play here. If we can, in a way, build the networks that bring more people into the conversation through creative means, by using avenues that are available and accessible, such as not just relying on digital media, but going the low-tech route with printed materials and town criers and community radio stations, we can reach those people and reignite their commitment to the social contract and to reforms. Lastly, I think civil society has a role to play in terms of modeling new behaviors. We know that corrupt systems are underpinned by social norms and our own behaviors as citizens that make them become entrenched over time. So I also think maybe this isn't a big ticket item on the minds of civil society organizations, but how are we conducting ourselves? How are we modeling transparency and accountability? I think just in how we, as civil society leaders, make decisions and run organizations in a way that is ethical and transparent, and hold ourselves and those in our CSO networks to account, can model to community members what transparency can look like. And so I think that is also important, because in a way, if we highlight what is good, if we also celebrate do-gooders in our countries, we have a real opportunity to create new role models in places where people get despondent, where there are few role models that they see as people to look up to, and where young people might feel that they have no one in whose footsteps they can follow. So I'm a huge champion of celebrate what is good, model what is good, and building networks around that. I also want to encourage people to take stock of what we are good at in our individual civil society organizations, and let's work together. I think it's only through collaboration that we can achieve large-scale reforms. And as my colleague mentioned, it's not easy and it's not fast or linear. But what might happen if we pool our resources and if we partner with each other instead of competing with each other? Because at the end of the day, if we are all truthfully working towards a more equitable society, and if we're all working towards increased participation, we should be able to overcome these barriers between us, to overcome the challenges of a lack of participation and a lack of reaching those who are marginalized. Thank you.
Thank you. You're welcome. And Mr. Ibrahima, the floor is yours. Can you unmute yourself?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Allen. Yeah, I'm very happy to be here today as a proud Mandela Washington Fellowship and RLC alumnus. I am also the proud recipient of the 2021 U.S. Department of State Anti-Corruption Champions Award. I'm so grateful to the Yali program and the impact that it continued to have in my life. I'm Ibrahima Khalil Gay from Guinea, and I'm the president of the Organization for Positive Change, an NGO that promotes peace, education, good governance, and development since excuse me. Can you hear me, please? Can you hear me? Okay. Okay. So I was saying that I ran that NGO since so the corruption is clearly our priority since its launch, because we believe that corruption is our only problem. Because of it, more than 53% of the population lives in poverty, according to IMF, while the country has natural resources whose value is so great that it could lift everyone out of poverty. So for us, fighting for accountability is fighting for justice, for education, and for life itself. So to move quickly with our excellent topic, I would like to start by one of the quotations from an article that I published 2 years ago during the quote, based on freedom of judgment and action, as the others is an essential element of functioning of public administration. Without on procedural manuals or deontology that express the seriousness and professionalism of the bodies, it must be recognized that the behavior of those in power with regard to materials or money constitutes the most important point in the eyes of the citizens. End of quotation. So in many countries, the majority of the people do not care about public policies or the development strategy. No, they may say these are people care about realizations and the matter of corruption. So if you give us water and electricity, and the rest will legitimately say, bravo, but how can he buy this property or this car? Why do you leaders have a high standard of living while we, the people, struggle to get basic needs? So we need responses. I especially invite you to visit areas and the officials working in this sector in Africa. You will see the disparities for yourself. So what are our demands? We just ask for transparency. We ask for information. We ask for good governance. We ask for justice for all, and more important, we need to see sanctions when these things are not provided. From there, the actions of the civil society starts. The civil society becomes then the intellectual body of the population, standing governments on one side and acting as a counter to government's power on the other side. Standing with government by providing information on the needs of the population to be taken into account. We are witnessing the participatory annual budgeting in many countries, and the civil society of Benin is a very good example in this process. This makes the understanding of the governance system very easy for the general public and finally helps them to conduct appropriate initiatives. So acting as a counterpower because it's a bridge between the citizens and the population. So as soon as the civil society mentioned any from embezzlement to favoritism from leaders, it has the responsibility to act. These acts can vary from one country to another, but the fundamentals are asking questions and requiring quick responses, alerting the general public, taking the case to justice, organizing demonstrations, and requiring sanctions. Understanding good governance and democracy that 12 Mandela Washington Fellows, including myself, wrote prior to the 2018 Mandela Washington Fellowship convening in Rwanda. We have mentioned in this toolkit that the accountability concerns the relationship between the elected leaders and citizens. Under this arrangement, citizens are able to demand that the state justifies its actions, and actions must be conducted with utmost transparency. Citizens have a duty, I repeat, citizens have a duty to hold elected leaders to account of actions and decisions they take on their behalf. If an elected leader isn't performing or projecting the actual views of the people they represent, democracy prevails a procedure to recall this elected official the position they hold. And I say this can never happen if the civil society doesn't assume this role on behalf of the citizens. So yeah, during the questions and answer session, I from our organizations, and I believe the same practice could be seen in many African countries and the civil society organization. And thank you.
Father, you're muted, sir.
Thank you very much. Sorry, I was muted. I said thank you to all for your remarks. And the time has come now to open the floor to everybody and all the participants and interactions between the speakers and the participants. And you can maybe check the backstage where some questions are coming in and see which question you can address any of the three speakers. But maybe to start, I had a question for all of you. Is there any good example that you can share in Africa where civil society has made a difference? I mean, the role of civil society has been really put forward and has made a difference in the lives of the people. Any good example that you can think of in Africa? Anyone can go. Yes.
I can start. So I'll put two examples. Two from Nigeria. One is there was this not too young to run bill that was championed by a civil society organization in Nigeria, which was targeted at reducing the age range for elected or age limit for elected officials. I mean, you needed to be like 40 years to be a senator and like 30 years to be in the rep or to be in the subnational houses of assembly. And there was a huge campaign that included using of media, institutional support, and being able to use that to be able to get access to be able to push for that to happen. And it was passed. It was signed into law. The president signed that bill into the law, and there was a huge movement in the way. And one thing I learned was that they didn't just do it alone. I mean, Yaga, they went with other organizations, and were like 3 or 4 organizations that they made sure that this happened. And also with budgets, we and EIE and other organizations worked on Open NAS, which was a campaign to get National Assembly to open its finances to the public. And because we agreed that the legislature is the highest organ of accountability within the democratic system, they should even be open. He who comes with equity must come with clean hands. And we had to make sure that the National Assembly in Nigeria opened up its finances to the public. And that happened just because there was intense work of over 2 years of the civil society in getting that to happen, to happen. And if you add up all the work we do in budget around advocating for service delivery in local communities, schools being built, hospitals being built, roads being tarred in local communities, just because of intense energy and intense advocacy. It's just, of course, all points to the fact that if we make the push and we do the work, and we do it in a very strategic manner, we would get results as civil society. And I know that some societies' environment can be restrictive and can be challenging, but in a way, it's also necessary that civil society have this resilience to be able to pursue change. Thank you.
Okay, so maybe let's first address a question from Ineza Grace. She's asking, how can a youth CEO hold leaders accountable when we are constantly reminded that we don't have the skills or experience, and yet we are so close to the fear of the current and next generation of our community? So I think the question is addressed to any of the speakers.
I'm happy to jump in, Father Alain.
Okay. Yes, you're welcome.
I think that is a really, really great question to be posing. And there's no easy answer, because I do think it's important to note that it is in the interest of power holders, and especially corrupt power holders, for us to think that we're too small to make a difference, right? And so no one is going to necessarily give you a seat at the table. Making the argument that you're inexperienced or you lack the skills keeps you subdued and keeps you questioning your own agency. So the only real answer I can give you about that is to show those people who you want to hold accountable that you do have the skills and the experience and the ideas, and band together with others so that you have a variety of skills and experiences to bring to the table. You don't have to prove to someone you're holding accountable that you have the skills or experience. The only person you're accountable to for that is to prove to yourself that you're going to pursue doing it. So don't wait to be invited to the table. And I say that knowing and with full acknowledgement that closing civic space in a number of countries makes this really, really difficult. But this is where we have to become really creative and network builders so that we can overcome these issues of space. At the Accountability Lab, we currently run an accountability incubator across 12 countries where we identify young change makers who are pushing for reforms. And we see young people every year taking incredible actions, doing, for example, social accountability audits in their communities, young people who are running advocacy campaigns that they conceive of themselves and who have far and wide-reaching effect. And that's just because they started it and they didn't rely on someone telling them, here's a podium, you have the skills, go forth. We kind of have to claim that. And I think sometimes it's also about starting to do these things in ways that do not put you at risk. So gathering a small group of people together and bouncing around ideas, or finding ways to use creative methods, whether it's muraling or music, or putting messages out on radio that don't put you at risk, but that starts creating a new conversation. That's how you start generating the change you want to see. And unfortunately, it's in the power holders' best interest to tell you that you don't have the skills, but you're not accountable to them for your skills. Just go out and do it.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Yeah.
Coming to the same question, my first recommendation is to get interest in issues of accountability and human rights. These subjects are now a career work, so we can dedicate a lifelong lifetime, like to these causes today, if of course we worry about the future of the nation and our own future. So when there is bad governance, it primarily affects the future generation. So I think youth should try to master the national budget and the audit reports and follow up the ongoing public actions to document everything and inform the citizens. Yeah, if it doesn't work today, it will save one day, these documentations. So the next, we must work together, not alone. Though the people we face generally have more power, we must come together as young people and defend the common cause. Even if you do not have the authorization papers to act in your countries, you can still stand together and act because right to do so. We are stronger together than we are alone.
Okay, thank you. Any other insight before we ask Ibrahima to come in with the question which is addressed to him?
I think just a quick one there is just partnerships. Young leaders must be able to push for partnerships and early stage. They must be able to push awareness around how to build partnerships. There are entrenched traditional organizations that work on projects, and you might be the upstart or the civic startup. Sometimes you don't get that respect within the space, maybe because they feel that you are young and new. But trying to seek partnerships with the other organizations that are pushing things, you can now quietly build your own legitimacy or your own reputation gradually within the space. So I always tell the organizations that are new and young that don't let it be an all or nothing opportunity. Let it be an opportunity that for you to also gradually to build partnerships across the chain. And as you build my reputation, and also try as much as possible to not just be an all-weather NGO or just doing every single thing. Try and take narrow focus and narrow attention on issues and ensure that you can prove your proficiency in that kind of space as young CSOs. Let your organization be known for clarity around purpose and not just be moved around, because gradually people begin to label you around issues and say, okay, this is what we know budget for, fiscal transparency. And when we need situations or when you need ideas, we've seen that over years they've developed capacity and they can be of help. I think I'll put it at that. Apologies for the disruption.
Yeah, okay. So, Ibrahima, you are being asked, what advice on accountability do you think are important for Yali alumni to learn when developing their leadership skills?
Yeah, I will start by saying that it is necessary to come together. When I decided to run an NGO, I actually tried to bring many people together from the Yali network. So in our NGO, most of the members, the active members, are the Mandela Washington Fellows or the RC Fellows. The only thing that we did is to try to find a complex issue and try to provide a quick and sustainable responses to it. So actually, we at the beginning of tried to help the government. So we provided information platform on administrative procedures in order to help citizens to understand what is the fixed prices to get a passport, for example, or an ID card. And yeah, this was a kind of friendly activities that we realized. And at the end of the day, people were not seeing us as opposants. We were like helping the country to move forward. So, and I think that's a good thing. And the second thing, we decided to move to the training sessions. So we trained many people for them to be able to denounce corruption practices, because the time people do not know what is called corruption. So we realized that it was necessary to inform, to train citizens about these notions and how in this process. So we just decided to take the first step. I think that's the best advice I could give. We must take the first step and provide concrete actions, and I think the leadership will come later, of course.
Thank you very much. Maybe you can move to the second question, the next question, which is addressed for Chelly Lay. Mrs. Chelly, you're asked, what advice do you have for building coalitions with civil society working toward government accountability and ethics?
Great, thanks for that question. I have a couple of things that I think one should be thinking about when building coalitions. Firstly, and I think this is the obvious one, make sure that there's overlap in your vision and mission, that you are working together with partners on something that is clear, and the discrete set of things you're working towards, so that it's not all over the place, but you're actually all focused. And also, almost most importantly, that there's overlap in ethics. I think when you build a coalition for accountability, the most effective way to ruin it is if one of the partners are found to be acting, for example, in a way that is unethical or corrupt, because that will essentially erode the trust of community members and others in your whole process and in your whole partnership or your whole coalition. So make sure that everyone stays on track and believe in the same values and ethics at the back end. Secondly, I think it's really important and practical to, while you're working on this mission, map out what the different actors you're trying to bring in, what they have to offer to the coalition and what they need. So that you are able to fill the gaps in your own organization's reach. For example, if you don't currently have a certain set of skills on board, find an organization that's good at that and partner with them. If you have, if you've struggled to reach marginalized communities, find other CSO actors who are working with those communities or who are led by those communities, more importantly, so that you are adding a new set of resources in a way to your coalition, and so that you're stronger together. There has to be a value add in the people you're bringing together. And the thing I really value is coalitions that challenge themselves to actively include a diversity of ideas and a diversity of people. If we say that we want civil society actors to work together for accountability, then we have to hear different opinions and we have to have different groups included in the decision-making structure of this coalition. So it's really important that you don't just go out and build coalitions with exactly like-minded organizations or people so that you end up with 5 male-led organizations, for example. Seek out the diversity actively and it will make your coalition stronger. And remember that while you're looking at the gaps you want to fill, be very clear on how you as a coalition will spend your resources and band your efforts together so that you're able to make decisions and move the process forward.
Thank you very much. If Olusegun is there, there's a question. Do you believe a change in leadership or changes is legislation are more effective in improving accountability and ethics?
Yeah, yeah, it's a fact that legislation important in transforming and in trying to change ethics and trying to transform the environment. But one thing that is extremely very important is that for an environment where even where you have legislation, if the civil society are not organizing in a concerted way, you find out that those legislation is not a proof that things will go the proper way. It's not a proof that ethics or accountability is going to happen in the environment. And I'm going to take an example. You can have a freedom of information law in the country, but it does not mean that if the civil society still don't do a work around vigilance and advocacy, that the access to information rights were going to be honored, even though it's in the constitution. For example, in Nigeria, there's laws around legislative and judicial independence, but it doesn't still mean that people tend to do that. It's good to codify things. It's good to institutionalize things in a significant way. But more importantly, it's also more importantly, is that we also hold government accountable on the basis of our own effort, on our own concerted effort. And I would also say, so legislation is not going to be a substitution for an environment that has restrictive policies on civic rights or freedom of people or freedom of thought. So in a way, we must just understand that the laws are important, but the norms are also equally important. And we must make sure that we protect both of them. And then the protection of those norms means civil society understand that things can be written in the law, but they also need to continuously advocate for implementation of those laws. The other thing they say also, when we are trying to draft the laws, we also must work much more closely with the legislature to ensure that there are punitive elements in the law. I mean, in Nigeria, you say you have to provide access to information if I make a request. But if you don't make a request, you ask that we go to court. And then when we go to court, you have the resources to keep a case in court for 3 years. I don't have the resources to keep the case in court for 3 years. And so there's already an asymmetry and a power imbalance in that kind of scenarios. But imagine there's a punitive element of this is the fine, or this is the punitive element for you not responding to that opportunity. That gets people to do much more to do the right things much more. So I would just put it at that. Legislation is important, but it does not replace the place of norms building and advocacy within the democracy. Thank you.
Yeah. Can I go? Yeah, I think coming to the same point, I think the civil society has two fundamental roles in holding leaders accountable. Yeah, the first one is the prevention. We must laws that should be voted at the parliament include measures that oblige the leaders to provide and publish reports on their management. We must fight for the open data and the access to information. In Guinea, the free access to information law project is still sleeping and not being voted at the parliament, but we claim the right since it's mentioned in our constitution. So the civil society has a say during the law-making process, and we should use that right. The second, action through legal means. As I mentioned before, the civil society organization should master financial law and monitor the public action, while providing regular reports, as we did, to the citizens and international partners. They should also be in the front line when action should be taken in justice if they find any issue that has not been resolved by providing correct answers, such as sanction. Yeah, another productive action is denunciation via social and traditional media. In most of our countries, unfortunately, leaders do not fear justice, but they care greatly about their image and the public opinion. So denunciation in the media is a powerful tool in holding leaders accountable.
The island is having a network challenge in there, but we could take a question that has to do with the closing civic space across many African countries. Talked about a lot. How has this changed your approach or strategies in your work? How has it made it more difficult? And I think that question around this closing civic space is it's a feature of the trajectory of democracy. And that's getting much more worrisome because it's not just in Africa, it's also happening in Eastern Europe, I mean, in Latin America, with populist governments and even across Asia. And something I think it's in a time of attack, it's also a time for consolidation. It's also a time for solidarity. And that's the first thing I tell my colleagues, that this is not the time where you're squabbling over because of grant and other resources. We are in a competitive mode, in some sort of way. And this is not the time for us to also worry about this is the organization is trying to get the shine or is going to get the reward. This is time for us to come together and consolidate our voices when we know that our work, our agency is being threatened. So I feel that's what I thought when it comes to closing civic spaces. We must, one, be able to consolidate our efforts. Two, also be able to use the international pool and international resources to be able to mainstream our voices. So international media is always very powerful in context of the environment where we serve, just because people want to borrow loans, they also want to work within those environments. It's also very important that we pull international media in on some of these conversations. We also pull in multilateral and bilateral agencies in. So most of these spaces also need grants and support from the World Bank, the IMF, and the bilateral organizations like DFI, the USAID. We also have to mainstream these conversations to these spaces because they also have a bit of leverage on our government in terms of the resources they provide to them. And that's also very, very expensive. And I think the third part for me is that in closing specific spaces, the legislature is always the element that serves as a rubber stamp for some of these things, because most of the time they want to codify them in laws. We must also be able to use that connect between the civil society and the legislature, and that has become much more important so that we can be able to amplify some of the conversations. And I know a lot of times where they have been pushed to regulate social media or to regulate digital media in Nigeria, it was always about using the voices, the critical voices in the legislature to shut that down. And that was always much more, that's always very, very effective. So we can't be fighters to everybody. We can't make everyone an enemy. We need a bit of a tiny crop of allies on our own side too, especially at the legislature. I will stop at that and allow Chair Relay and Ibrahim to also.
Thanks for that, Olusegun. And I 100% agree with what you said. And I just want to reemphasize the power we have as civil society, and especially monitoring things that you mentioned around international financial institutions and the funding that's coming to our countries, because that's a big lever. Being able to say that our government received this money and it's not being used the way it was supposed to be used, because then you essentially have a whole lot of leverage around funding resources to the government. So that is something to always bear in mind, that there's a critical role for citizens and CSOs to play in that. The question also was asked about how closing civic space has changed our organization's approaches. And I just want to touch on that for a second. One thing that Accountability Lab has tried to do differently is to focus on highlighting positive deviance. And that in many ways has kept us quite safe in a lot of countries. So instead of naming and shaming actors that are doing the wrong thing, we've been naming and faming civil servants who are doing the right thing and building coalitions around and support networks around people doing the right thing, and amplifying those things, so that in a way, no one can sort of put a target on your back and say that, you are mudslinging or you put yourself at risk because you're pointing out political actors who are corrupt, which all of us in most countries know that happens, and we know who those actors are too. And that work is important. But at the same time, we found that building upon things that are working in a positive way can actually keep you safe in terms of that closing civic space, because you are not going after people, but at the same time you are making a difference because you are modeling new norms, you are creating new role models, and you are building the capacity of those people who are seeking reforms in your country. Ibrahim, I don't know if you had ideas on closing civic space in your context.
please. You are on mute, please. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just saying that I would like to mention some challenges that we are having in our country. Yeah, in this fight. The main challenge is the fact that many people have been influenced by politics, and they are worried of participation. This is especially true for the people from provinces. So when you go to the people to talk about budget or denouncing corruption, some will say this will never work or the authorities will never listen to us. In response to that, we say, and you can also say that, yes, it can work. It happened in north of Philippines when citizens oblige a company to use the required number of cement bags during a road construction and then report the case to the central administration. At the end, the company was obliged to rebuild the infrastructure thanks to the citizens' mobilization. So do not say it's impossible, but take the first step and you will surely succeed. Some others will say, how do I know I can trust you? You may be working for the opposition. So to this, you can say, follow our actions, and if you don't follow our, you will learn to trust by joining us in action. We are working for you, the people. Yeah, and this work is also the role of the opposition, as we are witnessing in Russia and other countries, who puts themselves at risk to stand up for their rights. We understand that they have to listen to everyone. So this kind of mentality affects our work, but it doesn't stop us. I encourage you to read the book Citizens Against Corruption by Pierre Landel Mills to find more inspiring action taken by the civil society organization or the citizens through spontaneous actions.
Thank you, Ibrahima, and everyone who's watching. Our moderator dropped off, but we're persevering, so thank you to all the panelists for their remarks. We've got about 6 minutes left in this panel, and I wanted to give you all a chance to leave some really concrete ideas and recommendations for the audience. As you know, this is a summit celebrating the 10th anniversary of the Young African Leaders Initiative. We've got over 10,000 young African leaders registered and attending the summit this week. A lot of them are working in similar fields to you all. So I just want to go around and ask everyone to share top 2 recommendations for how youth can hold their leaders accountable for democratic governance and human rights. So if you were to leave 2 thoughts for young leaders in this field, what would it be? So I would like to start again with you, Ibrahima, and then we'll turn to Olusegun, and then finally to Sherry Lee.
Yeah, as I already said, my first recommendation is actually to get interest in the issue of accountability and the human rights. Yeah, because it is very important, especially in our country, Africa. So the next one is actually following the first one. We must stand together. We must work together in this fight. So these are my 2 recommendations for young Africans.
My recommendations, my 2 recommendations would be around we need to work together. We cannot work in a competitive mode and expect that we're going to get results. Most of the issues that we tackle are systemic issues, and they're all connected together. Bad governance, bad corruption, poor service delivery, poverty. And it reads even the SDG explains that clearly to us that these things are all connected together. So it's very important that we also work in a concerted manner to be able to get a bit of results in some sort of way. That's one thing for me. The second thing is the role of data and technology. As young people are leading changes within our environment, We need to embrace data to be able to guide conversations and build awareness within our environment. And we also need to ensure that technology is a big story in all of this. Data and technology will play a significant role in how we address inequities and challenges in our environment. And as young people, we must be open and embrace new ideas around AI, machine learning, data science, and things that can be much more transformative for our environment. Thank you.
I'm happy to see that there's actually so much synergy between the advice people are giving on this panel. So my two things are, firstly, to challenge yourself to build new and diverse networks of people working together to include voices that are excluded. It sounds pretty simple, but there just isn't enough of that happening. And reach people who are excluded from governance conversations. Make it simple for them to participate. And secondly, bring people along the journey with you. As a young leader, it can be pretty easy to actually hog space and to not along the way capacitate others and give them a platform to carry the torch after you. So make sure that in any community that you are working, build skills, build capacities, build opportunities, and step back at the right time, so that we also model what we talk about when we say we are including new people in this battle for greater accountability.
Thank you. Oh, thank you all. I'm hearing it's really interesting to hear a lot of the overlap in your suggestions, but also some of how it's contextualized to the different work that you're doing with your organizations. A similar question, but one that you might reframe a little bit, is just in terms of inspiration or encouragement. You've all been in the trenches of this work for day in and day out for years. This is what you do. For others who are in that similar situation, young African leaders, what is, in 1 minute, your word of inspiration, your word of encouragement to spur them on, for those who are already engaged in fighting for ethics and accountability in their governments? So I'll give you each a minute to answer that. I'll like to, let me reverse the order a little bit. So Shayun, I'll start with you, Sherry Lee, and then Ibrahima, Yali Alam, you can bring us home.
So much. Word of inspiration is, I'll put our work in resilience. The answers that we seek, the solutions that we find will not come easy, because these issues are rooted in norms, are rooted in people, and who are not going to yield to a new behavior or to a new dynamic. And so we, as young people, have lived through that experience where I expect all the answers will happen, all the train will run at once, and sometimes it can be discomforting and frustrating for us to see that. But what I would advise you is to go on and be resilient. Understand that we would not get answers without not continuous energy and courage along the way. So I wish you all around resilience, courage, and energy to change the societies that we live. Thank you.
I would like to speak to young women specifically and to say that spaces are often even harder for us to get into. So I want to encourage you to build your posse, your community of other young women who are going to support you and champion each other and like knock down the doors to get your foot in there and like have your voices heard, and along the way bring younger women with you. It's really the only way we're going to ensure that our perspective is also listened to in the rooms where it matters.
Yeah. We have, I would like to say that from 2016, since we started in 2015, like at the end of the year, we have informed or trained more than 15,000 people in and outside the country. Many people who were in the dark in terms of public information are no longer susceptible to be victims of corruption. We have encouraged them to denounce any misconduct from public officials through open and private platforms. We made communities understand that resources or infrastructure that comes to them are not gifts, as contrary to what politicians generally make them believe. So, I would like to say that just one bit of advice to my fellows. Take the first step without fear or worry. You have thousands of reasons to follow your money, and as we have been entrusted with building a peaceful and prosperous Africa. To do this requires more engagement and patriotism. I know we are ready for that. Happy anniversary to you all. Yeah, I would like to give a special mention to our consistent fellow, Donna Ray White from South Africa. Thank you.
Well, thank you all. Father Elaine, welcome back. I'll let you
Thank
thank.
you. So sorry.
No. I'll let you thank our speakers, and then we will close.
Okay, so thank you to everybody. Thank you for your inputs and insights, and thank you to the participants. And I wish you all well, and that we have understood that holding our leaders accountable is a duty to all of us. Thank you. So this